It is time to make this video. I believe that I finally found the perfect travel photography camera, or almost the perfect travel photography camera for the next couple of years at least. I'm in this nice campgrounds. It's relatively quiet here. I found that you can never find a completely quiet place in most of South America, but this is going to be good enough to film this and to share my findings with you. This is not going to be one of those videos where I look at the specs and then talk about how the camera could or should be amazing in theory. I've actually used this camera in a wide range of situations. So everything that I'm going to say comes from real, extensive, hands-on experience. I am not someone who jumps on a new release just because it's new. With this camera, I've really gotten familiar with it, got a really good feel for it, and that familiarity, it really makes a difference. You see, I believe in really using your gear and getting some mileage out of it. Like I did with a Sony a7 III. Got it in 2018 and I used it extensively all the way until I got this new camera in 2023. So if you've been following my channel, then you've already likely seen me mention that I want to do a more detailed video about this camera. You probably know which camera it is. If not, well then it may be a surprise and hopefully some very useful food for thought. Before I reveal this camera, let me just reiterate that it's not a perfect camera. There are a few things that I'm not crazy about and one thing in particular that really pissed me off. But I gave up on absolute perfection a long time ago, because if you wait for perfection, for everything to align exactly how you want, you will be waiting forever. And honestly, that applies pretty much to everything in life. All right, without any further ado, what camera am I talking about? If you've been watching my channel, then you know that I've been using this camera for close to a year now. And of course, the camera that I am referring to as the best travel photography camera, at least for the moment, is none other than the Sony a7C II. I will mostly be talking about it as a photo camera. I of course did use it for video as well, and I think that it's very important for modern cameras to have good video capabilities. But I am focusing on this camera's performance as a photo camera before anything else. Now, a bit of background on how I've used the Sony a7C II and how I've come to this conclusion that I've come to. I got the camera last November before heading out to Spain, and the camera got thrown straight into action, baptism by fire, if you will. I used it in all kinds of situations, and since I've been shooting with Sony cameras for a few years now, there really wasn't much of a learning curve. This camera felt like it combined some really good elements from other Sony cameras that I used, just all put into one. I shot with it very intensely during the Andalusia project. I also got to test it with a wider array of lenses than usual. My friend and the video guy for the project, he bought a 70 to 180 Tamron lens, so I tried the camera with that lens too. That's not a lens that I would usually use because, as you may be able to tell, I like to keep my kit relatively compact, but it was great to see how the camera performed in challenging to focus situations with a long lens like that. I photographed flamenco dancers in tricky lighting, and it performed really well. After Spain, the next real test came in Brazil. This is where I used the camera most. I documented many family life and everyday moments, because this camera's small size makes it very easy to carry everywhere. I'll talk more about that later. And of course, I also used it for my usual travel documentary work, capturing everyday life in different places and situations. My most recent serious use of the camera was during night festivities and a traditional dancing event the next day in the north of Argentina. Again, some very challenging situations, very dark at night, backlighting during the day, and a lot of movement too. So only after all that can I honestly say that for me, for the moment, this is the best travel camera. I'm not claiming that this is the best travel photography camera ever made up to this moment, or even that it will be beyond the next couple of years. I'm not working for Sony, so I really don't care if they sell more units or not. What I'm doing is simply sharing my opinion based on real life, real world experiences. Almost a year of use, sometimes intensely, sometimes more casually. But the key is that I've really put this camera to the test. Everything that I'll be talking about comes from real world usage. So why do I think that this is the best travel camera? Let me take you through what I love about this camera, through what stands out about it for me, then a few things that I really feel kind of suck, and a few things which for me are more or less neutral thoughts, but for some of you might be of more significance. Again, I am mainly talking about the Sony a7C II as a photo camera. Only a small portion of this video will be dedicated to its video capabilities. I do love a few things about this camera, and I watched quite a few videos on YouTube before kind of pulling the trigger and buying it. So the first thing, and maybe the most important for me, is that this camera, while being full frame, is really quite small. Will it fit into a pocket? What pocket are we talking about? In the pocket of your pants? No. Jacket pocket? Depending on the lens you have on it, yes. I like to have my camera in this kind of bag, which is probably not usual for most of you, but I like it. It's unlikely that people would think I have a camera in here. And this is very convenient for South America and works great for being more discreet and more candid. So with my favorite lens, the 35mm, the camera fits perfectly into something like this. Things change a lot if you do put a bigger lens on it, and I'll talk about that later. But for now, I have been shooting with a 35mm so much. And I said it before, I will say it again, for me, for the kind of work that I do, this is kind of the perfect combination. You know, at the end of the day, no matter the camera or the lenses, the one who makes the photos is you, the photographer. Much of the content here on this channel is educational. I make it so that I can help you develop creatively, so that you can develop your photographic eye. Occasionally, I also create educational photographic resources that are more in-depth, and the aim of all of this, of course, is just to help you make photos that are more powerful, photos that are special. If you've been following lately, you know that we're wrapping up the launch of one of such in-depth resources called the Photographer's Mindset India. It covers the many nuances of travel, people, and documentary photography. There are 50 real-life case studies, stories to learn from, diagrams, and even audio lessons. This launch special ends when the next week begins. So if you've enjoyed the content here over the last few weeks, if you really want to grow as a photographer, if you want to improve, this could be a really great resource for you. Or it could also just be a great way to support this channel. Anyway, back to the video. The next thing that I really love. I think that for the last few years, Sony cameras in general have had just excellent autofocus. I haven't shot with one of those more pro alpha series, in large part because they're a little too big for me, but I did have the Sony a6400 before it was stolen from me in Argentina, and I've used the Sony a7S III a lot. In fact, that's what I'm filming this on now. And about the two focus systems, I thought that they were excellent, but some features were in one camera that weren't in the other. And I always kind of thought, wouldn't it be great to combine them? And that is basically what happened with the Sony a7C III. It has different focus modes, which are actually useful. And there's, of course, the ability to quickly change through them. So I use this zone focus quite a lot because if I'm photographing a person, the camera will catch onto the eye or the face, the head, the body within all of this square area. I don't have to be too precise with my focus. I just select the zone and the camera does the rest. There are other modes that I really love too, like the tracking, which I felt was amazing in the Sony a7S III, and they brought it to this camera as well. You tap on a subject and it'll follow really pretty well. I can quickly switch to manual focus if I need to with a custom button, and there are different focus assist modes. Love all this, amazing. Very importantly, I feel that the screen on the Sony a7C II is very responsive. With some of the older models, this wasn't always the case, so this improvement is very, very welcome. A bit more about the screen. It is great that it tilts, though I'll talk about how I'd prefer it to tilt a little later on. I shoot mostly using the screen, and I'll often shoot from different angles. From low, sometimes like this, and sometimes I really like to get the camera in there. It's so important for me that the screen actually does tilt. This one I think is very subjective. It depends a lot on your body, on your hands, and how you actually like shooting. I think that I have pretty regular hands, and I love holding the camera like this. You know, almost with the tips of my fingers. I am not one of those people who complains about there not being enough grip because the camera is too small. Because I like to hold it like this, smaller is actually better. Now, holding the camera this way does work better when you have a smaller lens on it, a small light lens. With something like the 24-70 f2.8, not so much. I did use the camera mostly with that 24-70 in Andalusia, and I used it a bit with this lens in Brazil, and it's definitely not as comfortable. The lens really outweighs the camera body, so you have to use a much stronger grip. But if the whole body were bigger, then I'd not be able to hold it with one hand with my fingers, essentially. Anyway. Good low light capabilities. This isn't something that's new to the Sony a7C II, but of course I wanted a camera which would be on par with low light capabilities with other cameras that are out there. As I've said many times, I used to love my Sony a6400. However, it was a cropped sensor camera, hence it wasn't quite as good in the dark. So for me, it's just fantastic to have this really small camera which is very capable in low light situations. I feel like great low light performance is one of those non-negotiable features these days. Now, generally in the past, at least for me, this has been one of the biggest gimmicks when it comes to, trying to sell you a new camera. Oh, this camera has 50 or 100 megapixels. Great, who cares? That's an overkill for most situations. Well, this one has 33 megapixels, which is still a bit of an overkill for most situations, for most people. However, a high megapixel count in this camera does allow for a possibility for one feature that I really like that's in this camera, and from what I know, a few other Sony cameras. You can use the cropped sensor mode. Why would you do this? Number one is that you can essentially zoom in with your existing lenses. You will lose some resolution, and of course you can do this in post, but it's sometimes just more convenient to do it in camera so that you can see how much closer your lens can get you, right there and then. I have used this option a couple of times in Brazil and in Argentina. However, what I think the cropped sensor mode is more useful for is using cropped sensor lenses, which are generally smaller and cheaper. I've used this Sigma 16 f1.4 quite a few times. I've used it for time lapses. I've used it for filming myself for YouTube, as I'm doing now, and I get this nice blurry background, which is pretty good. And having the cropped sensor mode with the 33 megapixels makes this feature viable for photos, because even on this cropped sensor mode, you still get about 14 megapixels, which is quite frankly fine for most uses. A feature that I really appreciate as a travel photographer who often finds himself in windy and dusty environments. It's the fact that you've got the option to close the sensor when you're changing lenses. Look at this, you just switch the camera off. I think it doesn't work if you switch it off automatically, but if you turn it off, the sensor is covered with this curtain. This is so convenient to prevent dirt and dust from getting onto the sensor, which is just a huge pain in the ass when it does happen. Of course, there are still ways in which dust and dirt can get onto the sensor, but at least with this feature, you do reduce the possibility pretty significantly. I've got no idea how many other cameras have this feature. I know that I've never had it in the past, so as a result, I really appreciate it. The build quality. I think that it's pretty nice build quality so far. Now, I do have to stray off the main topic a little bit here for just a moment because I do have a gripe with how Sony builds some of their gear. Over the years, I have been disappointed. I had this little button for exposure lock get stuck on my Sony a7S III, then it just kind of popped off. So, you know what I did? I ended up unlocking it permanently and just super gluing it so that I wouldn't accidentally knock it and then get it stuck, because that would be super annoying when I needed to change the exposure compensation. For a camera of this level, I would really expect much more. Also, my 24-70 lens, which I did get a while ago, but something that costs over 2,000 bucks, you would think that the build quality would be impeccable. I know that I go through different environments and I probably take my gear into places that most people don't. But surely Sony is aware of people like me. I would hope that they're not building it just for people that'll, you know, take photos in ideal environments on the weekends or something like that. And again, over 2,000 bucks, you would expect build quality that can withstand a little bit of roughness. So look, this is what happened. The rubber part on the zoom has become loose. It's become unglued, which is really annoying because I kind of have to push it back to stick it on every now and then. Having said all of that, I will highlight that the build quality of the Sony a7C II has been absolutely fine, but I will again highlight that fine so far. And you know, granted that I haven't had it for that long, I haven't really shot in any extreme environments. I did shoot in the rain, it did fine, no complaints. And look, I'm not expecting miracles or anything like that. I just want the camera to function in a reasonable range of situations and to know that I can rely on it if things get a little bit rough. So all of those things are positives, and obviously I think that those positives are enough to say that this is the best travel camera for me for at least the next couple of years. The main things for me: the amazing autofocus, the different autofocus modes, the tilt screen that provides the ability to shoot from different angles, the fact that it's so responsive, and of course the great low light shooting. To have all of these, to have the full frame sensor in one very small body, those are absolutely reasons to get this camera. Probably the one that bothered me most, which I just want to share right away, is that one time the camera froze on me, like froze big time. Whatever I tried to do, I could not unfreeze it. Took the battery out, still couldn't shoot with it. I just could not make a photo. I had to factory reset the whole camera before it started working again. Fiddling, factory resetting the camera. Because of this, I obviously lost a few images. I was in a really photogenic village in Brazil when all of this happened. And as soon as the camera was able to shoot again, I started shooting again, but I forgot to set the image quality back to RAW after the factory reset. So I got a few photos of this dude with his horse, photos which I like, and they're JPEGs. I didn't want to shoot them in JPEG. I always prefer shooting RAW because for me, the RAW file is basically my digital negative. It is for most professional photographers. You could say it's my fault because it was I who didn't set the image quality back to RAW, But I say, well, there's no bloody reason why I should have been factory resetting it in the first place. So for me, so far, that is the worst experience that I've had with this camera. It has not happened again, and I hope that it won't, but it was very, very annoying. There was more freezing, but of a different kind. I shot some still photos with this Sigma 16mm f1.4 on cropped sensor mode, and quite a few times the camera would freeze when I'd do like a burst of shots. I didn't need a factory reset or anything like that, and it seemed that if I waited long enough, the camera would unfreeze, though that would take pretty long, so I preferred to take the battery out, and that way it would unfreeze faster when I'd put the battery back in. Now, it seems that this only occurred with this particular lens. Shooting with my Sony full frame sensor lenses, this problem never occurred, so who knows, maybe this is just a compatibility issue. Okay, I can kind of let that one slide. Also, this does not happen with video regardless of what lens you're shooting this, so hopefully this is fixable with a firmware at some stage. One thing that some reviewers mentioned was that this camera overheated while shooting video. And I have to say that yes, if you do shoot video a lot, you may experience overheating. A few times I was filming myself in sort of more hot environments, and I did get that message that the camera is getting too hot. I don't remember if it ever got to the point of shutting down, but if you are filming for extensive periods of time in pretty hot environments, then you can definitely expect that the camera will overheat. Does this then make the camera unusable? Well, I don't think so, but I'll say it again, I'm using this mostly as a photo camera. If you plan to use it more for video work in all kinds of environments, run and gun, extended periods of time, then I don't really recommend it for that. I use it as a secondary video camera, something to quickly talk into, maybe with a wider lens. I'll use my Sony a7 III for the main stuff, but as an occasional video camera or a hybrid camera for certain moments, like my Maracatu shoot in Brazil, where I wanted to capture both video and stills, it worked great. So, you know, definitely not a huge negative, but something to be aware of. Now, the following, like I said in the beginning, are kind of neutral thoughts rather than negatives or positives. These things are way too subjective, depends on you and your use, so I'll let you decide. So this one I don't necessarily think is a minus, but if you do use this camera, let's say like 95% of the time as a photo camera, then I think that a screen which flips out like this, as it does in this Sony a7 III, I think it's better. The camera stays more compact. It's faster to flip the screen out like this than doing this. But of course, you cannot really film yourself with this kind of screen. I really liked the way that the Sony a6400 solved this, or even my older point and shoot Sony RX camera. You see, you can flip the screen up. You couldn't use an external mic because it would block the screen, but they did make little workarounds for this, a special mic attachment. Overall, I really haven't found this to be a major disadvantage, and I understand why Sony would choose to use this kind of tilt screen. It appears that most brands now see this as a more modern solution to a flip screen, but well, I just wish that more camera makers got a bit more innovative, and I know that there are kind of hybrid flip out screens. I just wish that we saw them on more compact models as well. This is something that I really don't know if it's worth mentioning, but a lot of people, they complain about the Sony menu system. And honestly, I don't know if there really is any perfect kind of menu system that exists out there. You make it one way, one group of people will complain. You make it another way, and another group of people will complain. That seems to be the reality. People have mentioned that this menu system in this camera is a little clearer than in some of the previous models, and I tend to agree with that. I'd love to know thoughts from some of you. If you have this camera or if you're using the newer menu system, what do you think? Is it an improvement? Is there still a way that this can really be taken to another level? Please share your thoughts on that. Maybe a small gripe that I have is that there aren't many custom buttons. And of course, I understand that this is a cheaper camera, it's smaller, but you know, to put 1 or 2 extra little custom buttons here, I don't think that that would be too much of a stretch of budget or of Sony's engineering. Maybe I don't understand the physical limitations, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it just would have been really nice to have a few extra custom buttons. The biggest negative for me was the freezing issue. I hope that I never have it again, or I would probably quite radically change my opinion on the camera. Overheating during video, probably a very serious issue if you want to use this primarily as a video camera. Very few custom buttons, kinda sucks, but definitely not a deal breaker. A screen that flips out like this, subjective, worse for photos, better for overall usability. And the menu system, I haven't seen any menu system that everyone is happy with. Some final thoughts. I keep coming back to this idea that nothing is perfect and that it is pointless to wait for perfection. Instead, I think that you should ask yourself, what is most important to me? For me, I want something that I can take with me everywhere that's small enough and that will not let me down in capturing the moment when it arises, or at least almost never let me down. For the most part, the Sony a7C II has not let me down, except for that one weird time in Brazil and the few times that I used the cropped sensor mode, but with that specific lens. I also want a camera that performs well in low light. And the Sony a7C II checks all of those boxes for me. I don't know if there's anything else out there that meets these requirements quite like this camera does. Of course, there are smaller cameras. My old Panasonic Lumix, I think, is a bit smaller and its build quality is even better, but it's nowhere near as advanced. The Fuji X100VI, it's also smaller when you consider that they have that built-in lens, and ergonomically I think it's much better, but it's also not as feature-rich. I'm a big fan of the Sony AI autofocus, and I strongly believe that if we have access to these more advanced, useful features, then we should definitely take advantage of them. Now, all of these factors make this camera worth it for me, and I haven't yet tried absolutely everything that I wanted to do with it. I'm gonna start experimenting with off-camera flash soon, and the real test for that will probably come during Carnival in Brazil. But I wanted to get this video out there now because I know that many people were interested in this topic. So would I recommend this camera for others? It's never just a yes or no answer from me. I would say that if you're gonna use the camera like I do for travel, documentary photography, for people photography, real life stuff where size and being candid matter, if you want to take the camera with you pretty much everywhere, then absolutely, I would recommend it. Add to this a relatively affordable price tag and it becomes a no-brainer. Now, I haven't tried some cameras that are similar to this one, and I actually really don't plan to. I am not a camera reviewer, I'm a photographer. I can't keep changing cameras or getting to know new cameras all the time. I need to know the camera system and the camera inside out. So this has not been a camera review in the traditional sense. This is purely my opinion after real-world use. Also, I'm not against other cameras. If somebody tells you that there is another camera with all of the features that I've mentioned and it works better for you, then great, get that camera. I say that more choice is definitely better. I made this video because for me, this kind of content is mostly missing. I want to see someone who does the kind of photography that I do or that I want to do. Someone who really put the camera through its paces. I want to know if the camera really worked for them. That's the kind of person that I want to hear from to help me make a decision. The technical reviews and the specs, of course they're useful, but for me to decide, I really need more. Anyway, I hope this has been useful. If you're still in time, take advantage of the launch of the Photographer's Mindset India. I'm glad that I could share this more in-depth opinion. Happy shooting, and check out these other videos on the screen now.